All right, let's bring in Ithaca College's own Jack Michaels. Jack, we've wanted you to be on the show forever. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, well, it's easy for you to say that after the fact. I had to have a number of hearsay situations. Oh, I've been on their show 8, 9 times. So many, I feel like contacting me on social media was fairly simple. So I'll have to take your word for it, but I'm a little dubious as I enter this program.
We are crossing off like the whole gang. So
Yeah.
Gene, we
You
met in
are.
we in Vegas, which was a dream come true. Bob, we've had on a couple of times. We love you so much. Like my favorite Oilers game this season. Do you remember January 23rd? What does January 23rd mean to you?
Well, sadly, it meant a milestone birthday to me.
It was your fucking birthday, and there was a game
Yes.
going on, and the Oilers were trying to like make this run and do all these things, and they were like, "Hold on, everybody, it's somebody's birthday." And instead of talking about
I
the
know.
game, they spent like 20 minutes on giving you a cake, and that's how I like my hockey.
Yes. Yeah, and I don't know whether you remember the year before, they actually stopped the game to acknowledge the 1,000th game. And Darnell Nurse after the game was like, "Hey, you got to smile more, man. We were putting you on the jumbotron." And I was like, I was mortified that they're stopping an NHL game to acknowledge, me doing 1,000. And who knows? Someone counted that up for me, but these milestones, all they mean, guys, is I'm turning into an old man. As you can tell, I got some gray creeping into that beard of mine.
It's a good beard, though. Did you eat the birthday cake?
Unfortunately, as you can probably tell, I eat just about everything that's in front of me.
Hell yeah. Well, I'm supposed to have some sort of lunch or dinner date with Bob when I'm out there next week. So if you
Make
could,
sure he pays. Make sure he pays,
hell yeah.
please.
I don't know. If I'm the guest, should I be like, if I'm parachuting in when all of you guys are working, I'm not even applying for a credential. I'm just going for vibes only. So if I'm just dropping in, I feel like I should be buying people things for putting up with me.
Yeah, I know, but I'd like to see if Bob at least think for a moment that he might have to pay. I want to see him sweat a little bit.
Okay, so we love you, obviously, on the calls. And it is funny that what you're talking about with like the mortified they stopped the games of the whole crew and all of the extravagance that goes on. You do seem like one of the people who's like, hey, I don't necessarily need this. I'd be just as happy if we were all just kind of doing the job, but you have fun with it. And obviously, everyone knows you as the Sportsnet voice of the Oilers. But in the playoffs, you've been on the radio call, and fortunately, we've been able to. People have been syncing up the calls with the end of the games, and your calls at the ends of some of these series are incredible. What are the last 30 seconds of a big game, such as Game 6 of the Western Conference Final, like in your head?
Nothing. That's the answer. It's a blackout situation. It's totally, I'm caught up. I mean, not to put myself in the same breath as an athlete, but yeah, you're just kind of wrapped up in what you're doing. I never have any idea what I say. It's not like the end of some of these golf tournaments. I don't have like scripted things like, one for the ages or, at last, I Lord Stanley, I don't have any of that stuff. I don't like to script. I don't like to, I just kind of try to capture the moment, and especially when you're on the radio, you want to be a bit of a guide dog for people who don't have the opportunity to go. I mean, I've got to be mindful of the fact that the bulk of my audience doesn't have, let's face it, the money to attend these games. It is a bit of a privileged scenario when you get to this round. The ticket prices, not just Edmonton but around the league. I mean, this is a rare experience for people. And so when I'm broadcasting to an audience that is 10 times the people that actually can make the game, I want them to feel like they're part of it. I want them to feel like they're sitting by me watching the game with everything in their lives at stake, even though it's ultimately just a hockey game. Basically, I want to feel the way I would if I was watching, and we know how removed this is. If I was watching the Cleveland Browns in the Super Bowl, like I want to be in that moment, and I want the person to feel the same kind of energy that they'd get from me if I was watching the Browns driving, for a touchdown to win the Super Bowl. And I realize I might have to live 3 more lifetimes to get to that point, but I guess that's what I'm striving for at the end of those games. In terms of the words that come out, I have no recollection of any of them.
Well, first of all, I'm jealous that you black out and just spew like unbelievable stuff, because when I black out, I spew nonsense that is horrible. Your Game 6 call was so good that it led to the appearance of you on this podcast, because like I tweeted, I'm like out of breath, like listening to this call, and a bunch of people were like, "Get Jack on the podcast, get Jack on the podcast," and that's how here you are. But
Yeah.
do you ever have to like talk yourself down or kind of keep your emotion or energy in check? Because you were, it seemed like, on the brink of being out of breath for about a minute straight at the end of Game 6.
Well, fortunately for me in terms of occupation, and certainly unfortunately for instance, my son, when he's on the receiving end of a tirade, that's the one thing I've been blessed with. I don't drink tea with honey. I don't take these safeguards. I'm not sucking on halls. I may sound like I smoke 5 packs a day. I guess the only precautionary thing I do is I don't have bad habits like smoking or stuff that would get into my voice, but I'm just blessed with a decent set of lungs, in the sense that once I get going, I can usually finish up and then kind of exhale. And a lot of people sometimes give me credit after the fact, and I appreciate it for kind of letting the moment breathe. I'm not only letting the moment breathe, I'm letting myself breathe a little bit, at the end there. And I want them to feel the energy of the crowd as much as they feel my energy, because again, when you're an announcer, you got to realize you're not the show. The game's the show, and not just the game, but the whole atmosphere, right? When you're at a rock concert, or you're at an awesome party, there's a lot of stuff going on. And so sometimes it's nice to kind of give it 4 or 5 seconds so you can take in all that stuff. When I was teaching my kids to drive, I was like, the biggest thing, guys, you've got to get to is it's not just like the car in front of you and the road in front of you. You need to eventually kind of widen out your vision if you're going to be a good driver, right? And that's what I'm trying to do when I'm calling a game. Even though I'm on the radio, I'm trying to let everything else seep in a little bit. So again, they feel like they're next to me at the game, not just listening to me over, say, a telephone.
Are you aware that you're part of such a special group? And I'm not talking about the Oilers. I'm talking about like you and Louie and Gene and Bob and that whole group, because truly that broadcast during the like I watch every Oilers game, and a lot of it is because I love watching Leon Draisaitl and Zach Hyman and Connor McDavid, et cetera, et cetera. But as Gene knows, we've told Gene and Bob, like, we don't change the channel at any points because the broadcast itself is so good and the group is so exciting. Are you all aware that like we've kind of got something special here, and at least unique? Like we're kind of those bitches, as they say.
Best show on TV.
Yeah.
Well, what I would say is, I think you and DJ, or you and Pete, whatever the order you guys want to put yourselves in, there's a natural chemistry, right? I think it has allowed your pod to grow. It has allowed each individual guy to get some recognition or whatever. And it probably starts, and who knows, but it probably starts from the fact that at one point you were kind of buddies talking about the game. I don't know. I'm guessing. I've never talked to you before in my life, but I'm guessing if you're doing a podcast together, at some point you got along and said, you know what, we should do this. We
were industry
see
plants.
how this.
We're the first two white dudes who are friends to ever do a podcast. We're breaking new ground here.
Well, that's the thing is, honestly, I think a lot of what you're feeling from the show and what you're complimenting is the fact that we kind of ooze that a little bit, in the sense that we're genuinely friends. Like, Louis and Gene are two of the best people I know, and Bob is just such a character. And we love like talking about and arguing about almost every subject on the matter of sports there is. It truly is taking what you have in casual conversation and bringing it to a big audience. In our case, the friendships are real, the chemistry is real, and I think the reason we're able to connect with some viewers is they get the sense that these are people that enjoy being around one another, that enjoy sports, that enjoy being, a small part of the action. And we all have that in common. And we do. We're friends. And I think it helps. It's not a prerequisite in this business. And there's lots of stories about great broadcast teams that weren't necessarily the best of friends off the ice. For me, it feels a lot easier to have that pre-existing friendship. I mean, and I was good friends with all these guys before I started working with them. At least in the case of Louie and Gene, I'd been traveling as part of the radio team. We'd had dinners, we'd had a lot of nights together and fun times before we ever worked together. And I think that carries over, and I'm sure it does with your show as well.
Did you ever feel like, how's this happening? I'm an American. I mean, you don't think that like nationalism would exist
Yes.
so strong, but like
I almost
it
didn't
is.
apply.
What's that?
I almost didn't apply for this job
You
because of
applied
that.
for the Panthers, right?
I was in line for the Panthers a couple times. Jigsy has told me after the fact that he tried to get me in there. And there were a couple of extenuating circumstances while that didn't happen. I was a little close with the Islanders. Neil Smith all of a sudden was, when his GM tenure lasted 15 days, that might have affected some employment opportunities for me there. And then I was close with a few other spots. But when the Edmonton job came open, I think it was the only one open in the summer of 2010, and I almost didn't apply. I mean, no Canadian had ever done play-by-play for, or no American had ever done play-by-play for a Canadian team. No American had ever done play-by-play for Hockey Night in Canada. And after the fact, that feels pretty good. I mean, I mean, it's a big compliment to me, and I'm very proud of that. But yeah, no, I almost didn't apply. I almost did. Matter of fact, it's so funny with those other things. I really felt everything went well and I was going to get the job. And in this business, you learn that rejection, it's a lot like my dating history. It's 99.6% of my existence. But you know what? Maybe it was because I was relaxed and, just tossed it out there. And all of a sudden I'm flying to Edmonton and I'm like, holy cow, never set foot in the province. I'd really only been to Toronto and Victoria when it came to Canada. So, border cities. And, it just so happened that this turned out to be the big break. That's the way it is in life. Everything you think usually is turned on a dime. But I am glad it was a last second decision to apply, and so many things about that process kind of went right for me that, I feel exceptionally fortunate, and it's a thrill to be part of this city because I can't imagine it mattering more than it does to the city of Edmonton.
Are you as shocked and disappointed as I am that you haven't gotten more national run on national broadcasts? It's crazy.
I appreciate you saying that. And I think, when you get into this business, of course, you feel like, hey, I can call a game as good as anyone. But those decisions are so far out of my control. And I hate to sound like a player or a coach, but it's honestly like, what am I going to do about it? Right. I mean, there's a lot of talented people who do what I do. And if they're getting selected and I'm not, it's not an insult to me. It just shows you kind of the depth of quality people who love doing this for a living as much as I do, and that's ultimately the way you got to look at it. Because otherwise, you get yourself in a negative mind space.
So Tom Brady famously, like if you broke up his career into different chunks, they'd all still be Hall of Fame careers. If you broke up your broadcasting career, I think that it would just be so interesting in terms of like Oilers eras, because you drop in at what, summer of 2010, you said. So
Yes.
that's the beginning of all the good stuff for the Oilers. Here comes Taylor Hall. Here comes Jordan Eberle. And as we all know, you
Didn't
ended
turn
up
out
getting
that way.
What's that?
Didn't turn out that way, did it?
Yeah, so like you got like the oil change era that really didn't go so well, and then when you became the full-time TV guy is I think 2021, and that's when really the Oilers are taking shape. McDavid and Draisaitl are like entering their prime. You've seen the lowest of the lows with this, and now you're kind of at the top with the team. It's cliche, but like, does it make it sweeter to have experienced how much shit they've had to experience? And like, what was
Well,
it
yeah,
like
I
calling
mean,
some bad games?
yeah, no, I mean, there were plenty of, I mean, there were a few years early, the Dallas Aikens era, we were out of it by Halloween. I mean, you're doing a 65 game exhibition schedule. I mean, that's ultimately what it is. I mean, let's call it the way it is. Oilers got off to a decent start the one year. I think it was Nuge's rookie year. They were maybe 9-3-1, but that didn't last long, and it wasn't sustainable, as I recall. Habby Bloom was playing out of his mind. But yeah, I mean, the lean years always make you appreciate the good times, and I would say that for my career as a whole. I mean, I was, I called an ostrich race, for God's sake. I was doing, high school football reports, in Western Pennsylvania in the driving rain for 25 bucks a night. I did a morning radio show where, I'd have to bluff my way through an interview with the governor of Pennsylvania like I knew anything about local, let alone regional politics. That guy goes on to be the director of Homeland Security. His name was Tom Ridge. I mean, I think about all those things. I think about, talking with Joan Estes, master gardener, on my morning show when I was 22 years old about gardening tips. I think about talking with Trapper John about getting rid of rodents underneath your porch. I mean, you know, I- I've had a, I've had an interesting, but that's the good stuff, right? You're laying the foundation. I mean, there was a volcano that erupted that led us to, extending a road trip to 29 days when I was working for Alaska. I mean, it's funny, they keep talking about this is the Stanley Cup Final with the two cities furthest from one another, 2,500 miles. I've done three other hockey playoff series that are nearly double that: Anchorage to Trenton, Anchorage to Atlanta, and Anchorage to the longest one was Anchorage to Charleston, South Carolina. That's almost double the mileage. I mean, it's just funny. Like, and a lot of people far more talented than I don't have to do that. They're talented enough and good enough where they're seemingly in one of the four major professional sports by the time they're 30 or whatever. I didn't have the talent, but I have a lot more stories than they do.
And don't they say, Pete will know this? Don't, like, with lifting, they say use free weights instead of machines because you get like the auxiliary muscles, right?
Yeah.
Like having to do, instead of it all being made for you. I
Yeah.
so
Oh, so that's
believe.
my problem. So I'd
Yes.
be huge if
Same
I had
brother.
done
Yeah.
that. Dang
Same,
it.
yeah,
I
yeah.
knew
We've
I
just been
missed
using the
something.
machines is all.
Yeah,
But like
it
Yeah.
takes a certain level of control to keep the free weights in their place where you need them to be.
so you build like all these other muscles. I so believe, like, do everything. Take an improv class or do like whatever you need to do to kind of round out the skill set. And so many of the good broadcasters do have their like Anchorage chapters, you know?
Yeah. I can put up a dasher board as well as anyone in the National Hockey League. If you said, Jack, put up a dash, I could do it. I've done all that stuff. I've sold a sponsorship to a cemetery, keys to burying that night's opponent because we already had a locksmith, so I couldn't sell him keys to the game. I mean, you have to be creative, and you have to have a sense of humor when you come from the humble beginnings that I've come from. But yeah, I mean, if you're asking me, do I appreciate that? Absolutely. And I mean, I I do check myself every time, every so often I'll be like, "Oh, my shampoo wasn't, replaced in the morning or something in the hotel," and I'll catch myself and say, Jack, seriously, like, just get over yourself, like, so yes, I mean, I love the foundation that was kind of laid for me, and I love all those experiences, and all the crazy bus trips and some of the adventures and airline travel. It's all made this worth it, and I just can't wait to get started.
If a time traveler visited you back in November and was to tell you that the Edmonton Oilers would be heading for the Stanley Cup Final, How much full of shit would you accuse that time traveler of being?
I mean, that's a tough question. Honestly, I wouldn't be that surprised. I mean, the team I knew was good. They were in an incredible funk. At the time, think about it, like, and even the teams that did get in, and they were nearly 100-point teams, but the Western Conference, especially early in the year, remember the Coyotes were holding down a playoff spot. I mean, there were some teams that didn't get rolling until pretty late in the year. I honestly felt Edmonton was going to be in the playoffs. If you told me at that exact moment Stanley Cup Final, I might have been like, well, that could be a stretch because you knew Dallas, Colorado, and Vegas would be fearsome. And I think to some degree, Edmonton caught a bit of a break when LA got that last second goal on game 82. And all of a sudden, the Kings, whom the Oilers had already beaten twice in previous playoff series, was the first round opponent. Vancouver proved tougher than many people expected, including me in the second round. But I do think Dallas looked like a club that had survived the last two Stanley Cup champions by the time they got to Edmonton at times, not taking anything away from the Oilers. But I wouldn't have been as shocked as you think. I honestly wouldn't have. I felt it was a good team. I felt they needed something to go right to get them rolling in the right direction. I always felt they'd be in the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, I would have been concerned, but I didn't rule it out. I didn't rule it out, and really once they got rolling, I kind of thought, that's one of those situations. It's like a St. Louis. If you sail through the regular season, especially as a preseason cup favorite, you're just as liable to wind up the way Tampa did in the first round as 2019 as you are to raise the Stanley Cup. I honestly, I'm not saying I, would have put all my money on it. I'm just saying I wouldn't have been shocked.
How much have you learned, or how much has changed about this team in the postseason? Because people who don't watch the team regularly in the Western Conference Final came away impressed by how well the Oilers defended. People like me who do watch Oilers games
Yeah.
came away very impressed by how the Oilers defended. So, like, for somebody who's calling all the games and seeing them all the time, has anything changed? Like, is it a Knobloch thing? What has made them so much better and so much more responsible, especially as that Dallas series went on?
Well, here's the thing, guys. Since you watch every game, I think the Oilers won 8 in a row, then they lost 3 in a row, and I think they were sitting at 13, 15, and 1. And then they won 16 games in a row. Now, what do we remember about that streak? What I remember is 14 of the 16 games they allowed 2 goals or less. They didn't win them 7-3. And they had some cupcakes in that stretch, but they weren't beating them 9-2 for the most part. If you look at that streak, as I recall, there are a lot of 3-1s in there
Oh,
and
yeah.
4-2s and 4-1s, and think about game 4 against LA, a 1-0 win where you get outshot 33-13. Think about this. Dallas's perceived advantages in this series were what? Depth and goaltending. Well, Edmonton has the same amount of guys as Dallas with a Stanley Cup playoff goal this postseason. And Stuart Skinner outplayed Jake Ottinger. The penalty kill, 28 in a row. In my mind, hey, the power play might be historically good the last 5 years, but if you were asking me what's the one aspect of this team that has them in the Stanley Cup final, I'd tell you it was the penalty killers. I thought they sucked the life out of Vancouver in the second round, and I thought they were perfect against Dallas. Edmonton's power play didn't have to be great, and they still got 4 out of 5 to close the series, plus a shorthanded goal. Edmonton can win in a lot of different ways, and only those who've watched this team develop over the last 3 years know that the days of losing playoff games by 9-6 and 8-6 are over. And for that matter, the days of winning playoff games by those kind of scores are over. This club, if you look at their big victories, 3-1, 2-1 to close out Dallas, not 7-4, not 8-5. 3-1 and 2-1, and 2-1 on a night where they literally 5-on-5 had nothing going offensively.
Yeah, I texted DJ during that game, and I was like, a year ago, this feels like a game that the Oilers would have tried to win 5-6 or 6-0 when
And
they
they
got
would have
out to
lost
that.
7-2.
Yeah.
They would have got shredded.
That's exactly
Yeah.
what I said, and they're totally
Exactly.
okay with playing a defensive game and winning it.
Yeah.
Even from afar, I feel like I can feel the love that is in the Oilers dressing room this year. Like, it just feels like a group that really, really cares about each other and rallies around one another. Being so close to it, can you tell us anything about how much that group loves each other?
I can tell you this, they're good people. They're at a stage of their lives that's a little bit different from the average NHL team. A lot of them have families. A lot of them are deep enough in their lives to have kids. A lot of them have fiancés. It's not a team that, just plays video games and hockey. I mean, it's not that type of team. There's a depth to this team that comes with life experience as well as just sporting experience. And I think there's enough veterans in there that realize this may not come around. Corey Perry won a Stanley Cup when he was 22. He's been waiting 17 years. Adam Henrique went to the Cup final as a rookie. He's waited 12 years to get back to the stretch. It means a lot to these guys. And I think because they're more complete adults, that there's a closeness of feeling and a little bit there's depth to the relationships inside the locker room that are sometimes lacking, not always, but think about it. We're different when we're 30 than we're 25. We're different when we're 35 than 30. I think we appreciate friendships more. I think we appreciate certain stretches of time more and recognize how valuable it is. And I think that's what you're getting out of this team.
Well, he's an American hero and Canada's sweetheart. Jack Michaels, we are so glad you joined us. Hopefully, I'll see you out in Edmonton next week. I've never been before. You must expect like utmost madness that even you haven't seen out there, yeah?
100%. It's a great atmosphere. You'll absolutely love it. Just don't big time me. I mean, at least give me a nod when you walk by. You don't have to say, "Hey, Jack." You just give me a nod. Give me some form of acknowledgement.
I'll say this. I'll probably go to one of the games. I probably won't be able to swing doing 2 games. But what do I do for the other game? Like, do I do the moss pit or what's the move out there?
Oh, there'll be plenty of moves out there. You can take it. You might end up on a side street. I mean, there's going to be a lot of moves for the taking for you out there. You'll have a great time.
All right. Well, Jack, I can't tell you.
What happens in Edmonton stays in Edmonton.
Moves.
Okay. Because the audio or something. I thought he said boobs, and I was like,
boobs.
No.
That lady's boobs have taken over the.
That's viral too. That's viral too. Who knows? Maybe she'll be on the next podcast.
We're efforting it, Jack.
Oh, I'm sure you are.
You're the best. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks so much.
We all silly like the mayor.